What's up, everybody? My name is Ryan Thomas. Thank you for joining me live on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. Follow me at Thomas Takeover. Subscribe to the Thomas Take Sports Podcast YouTube channel, and as well, like the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. Yeah, like the Thomas Take Sports Podcast Facebook page. I'm so pumped for this episode. So, part one of tonight's show, I want to discuss the press conference between Chuck Liddell and Tito Ortiz. They're going to get it on for the third time in the MMA octagon. This time, though, they'll be fighting under a brand new MMA promotion. The first ever Golden Boy MMA event. And I've already dabbled a little bit here and there in terms of my thoughts on that event, on the new promotion, on this event, on this fight. I want to let it be known that one of the first proving grounds of this podcast were my takes on mixed martial arts. That is, really football and mixed martial arts, I'd say, are the backbone. The backbone and the heart of this podcast are football and MMA, combat sports. And the theme of today's show is obviously combat sports. I'm going to be talking Chuck versus Tito this press conference, and I'm going to give you my prediction for Canelo versus Triple G2, so tune into that for the boxing fans out there. So Chuck and Tito will do battle again in the first ever Golden Boy MMA event, which is run by, obviously, the Golden Boy, Oscar De La Hoya. Boxing fans should definitely know who Oscar De La Hoya is. He's one of the pound-for-pound biggest pay-per-view kings, pay-per-view stars the combat sports has ever seen. He has remained a mainstay in boxing and is now one of the most successful boxing promoters in the game, in the fight game today, period. So originally when this idea, started to get circulated, I thought it was never going to happen. Chuck's been out of the game for about 10 years now. Tito Ortiz Chuck hasn't fought in 8 years. He hasn't won a fight in 10. Tito Ortiz, I thought after his exit from Bellator in his last fight, he won in January of 2017, fairly recently, versus Chael Sonnen, which I thought was a true shock. I did not see Tito winning that fight at all. I think that was actually one of the bigger upsets of Tito's career. But Chael Sonnen's layoff added into a lot of that, I think. The ring rust, whatever. I don't know. That was just such a weird fight. So, I never thought we'd see either of these guys again. And then here comes Oscar De La Hoya walking around Las Vegas, Nevada with Chuck Liddell, walk around Las Vegas with Tito Ortiz, walk around California, I should say, with Tito Ortiz. And this started to gain some steam. Pay-per-view event, live at the Forum in California. And it's a great venue. Originally when the fight was signed, sealed, and delivered, when it was announced that this fight was going to take place, there was no venue, there was no date. Oscar De La Hoya was very cryptic in terms of the information. I honestly didn't know what weight the fight would be contested at. I thought, is this going to be a heavyweight fight because these guys are older? No, these guys are cutting down to 205 pounds where they did battle for the first and second time back in the UFC, back at UFC 47 and 04 and UFC 66 in 2008? No, 2004, 2006. Yeah, 2004 and 2006. So this is for those of you guys that don't know. For those of you guys that don't know, Chuck Liddell and Tito Ortiz is like Ali Frazier of MMA, in my opinion. I would say that Chuck Liddell is as revered a character in MMA as Ali is in boxing. I'd say Tito Ortiz is just the rivalry itself. That's the first rivalry that has come to my mind when I think of MMA rivalries. It all started with Tito and Chuck. That is like the first chapter, really, of mainstream MMA. You throw Randy Couture in there as that trifecta. Those three guys were what helped MMA get put on the mainstream. Matt Hughes in the welterweight division, Rich Franklin, guys like BJ Penn as well. Those were the guys. Those were the guys. Not Hoist Gracie, not Ken Shamrock. Hoist was fighting in his pajamas, pulling eyebrows off. And then you had Ken Shamrock, who was pretending to be a WWE wrestler. Those were the main guys. And I'm not throwing shots at those two guys. I don't want it to sound bad, but I mean, Hoist Gracie was fighting at the public park. It wasn't really fighting. It was the old UFC days were very bad. And this was the true greats of the greats in uniformed, reformed MMA. Chuck Liddell, Randy Couture, Tito Ortiz, those three guys in that light heavyweight division were the three biggest stars in the company at that time, along with Matt Hughes, along with Rich Franklin. So, this fight, I'll watch these guys fight 100 times. I'll watch these guys fight on pay-per-view if they were 80 years old. Me, I'm just that big of a fight fan. I'm just that big of a fight fan, whether it's boxing or MMA. I'd watch Canelo and Triple G fight 10 times. We watched Manny Pacquiao and Juan Manuel Marquez fight 4 times. This is the fight game. And as long as two guys believe they can still fight, they're gonna fight. George Foreman, Bernard Hopkins, Sugar Ray Leonard coming back after a 5-year retirement due to a detached retina. He came back, fought Marvin Hagler. So to say that, these guys are too old, that we don't have a place in that. As long as these two guys believe they can fight, as long as these two guys want to put on the circus and put on the dog and pony show, I'm going to ante up and watch it. I am so excited for this fight. The MMA fan in me, the hardcore MMA fan in me, I'm licking my chops at this fight because it's 2-0 Chuck. And Chuck Liddell has everything really to lose in this, and Tito Ortiz has everything to gain. Being that, Chuck Liddell and Tito Ortiz are two guys that Chuck Liddell doesn't really have anything to prove. He beat Tito twice. Tito Ortiz doesn't really have anything to prove. He walked out with his head held high in Bellator, coming off a big win versus Chael. But the one dynamic of this fight that I do find interesting, that is the narrative of this fight, is that, yes, these guys are older. Yes, they should not be fighting. The average person would say a 48-year-old man should not be fighting in, shorts and 4-ounce gloves in a cage. That should not really happen. But these guys were criminally underpaid throughout the course of their careers. Are these guys financially successful? Are they well off? You could say so, but they've each had to form their own businesses outside of the fight game to allow them to continue to make money. And that, I don't think, is fair. These two guys, whether you like Tito more than Chuck, whether you like Chuck more than Tito, we can say this about both of these guys and agree that without these two guys, without their rivalry, the UFC might not even exist right now. So they were criminally underpaid by Dana White, and fighters in the UFC still to this day are being criminally underpaid. So here you have a boxing promoter walk in who I think his intentions are not what they seem, and I'll get to that in part 2 of tonight's show on this matter, but you have a boxing promoter who walks in and acts like he cares about MMA. First off, he doesn't. He's looking to make more money outside of the sport of boxing. He's looking to dabble in MMA because MMA is now proven as a moneymaker. The second largest fight in fight history. Think about this. The second largest fight in the history of fighting in terms of pay-per-view buys. 1/2 of that boxing match featured an MMA fighter. So MMA is as big as it's ever been, and if you can, start off a promotion such as Golden Boy MMA, which is really Golden Boy Promotions still, Liddell versus Ortiz, and put on these MMA fights. One, I'm interested as an MMA fan to see if fighters can make more money. And so is Oscar De La Hoya. He's positioned this fight as an opportunity for Chuck Liddell and Tito Ortiz to be promoters in this deal, get revenue shares, be their own promoters, be their own bosses, get the revenue, get the pay-per-view points, get a good split, if you will, on the pay-per-view buys of this card, which, I almost feel like buying it just to help these guys out. And I'm not saying that to be like, oh, I'm a nice guy, but I know for a fact that these guys were criminally underpaid because I look at the numbers. I've studied the numbers the last, 7 to 10 years since the UFC's real big boom, past the Ultimate Fighter 1. I've seen these numbers and they haven't changed much. They've actually gotten worse. As the sport has grown, you'd expect the numbers to get better, and as the sport has grown, it's went in the opposite direction in terms of the UFC. So Oscar De La Hoya is positioning this as he's going to come in, he's going to help these fighters get paid, he's going to allow these fighters to get the money that they, quote-unquote, deserve, which part of me thinks he's genuine in that because he was a former fighter. He did make a lot of money as a boxer. He was a great champion for a long time. Multiple weight divisions. So it lets me think, well, maybe he is being honest. But then I remember he's wearing the promoter's hat now. And when you wear that hat, it's very tough to get that stench off. In terms of just we'll say he's wearing the promoter's cologne. When you wear the cologne, it is very pungent, to say the least. So I think that this is great on one hand, that two fighters that are above the age of 43, Tito 44, Chuck 48, they're going to get their money. And they should. The fact that at these fighters' ages, at the age of Tito Ortiz, at the age of Chuck Liddell, the fact that these guys have to come out of retirement collectively to get this one massive payday is very sad. That's the point that should be driven home. Not the fact that these guys are too old. The fact that these guys fought in wars, fought in some of the biggest fights in MMA history, not even including each other against each other. I'm talking about throughout their own careers. Tito Ortiz fought some great fights over his career. Chuck Liddell fought some great fights over his career. And these guys obviously shared the octagon twice in two great fights, but majority of these careers, obviously, they didn't fight each other. They only fought each other twice. Chuck Liddell's fought 38 men. Tito Ortiz, I feel like, has fought around the same amount. So, here we go. This is the third one. We'll see what happens. I'm going to watch it. I know that. But in terms of the press conference, we'll talk a little bit more about that. I'm going to point out some things that I liked, some things that I didn't like, and I'll get your reaction on it. A lot of great fights, though. A lot of great fights coming up, not just on all fronts. Boxing, Golden Boy MMA, Golden Boy Promotions is going to have a hell of a fall with Liddell Ortiz 3 and then Canelo versus Triple G. And they're going to have a hell of a trilogy with Canelo and Triple G, because I think that will happen. There will be a third fight between those two fighters. And maybe even a fourth fight. Maybe. Just maybe. And then you have, obviously, September is kind of washed after Canelo versus Triple G. There's not a whole lot there. Then you have October 6th, you have Floyd versus Conor. Or not Floyd versus Conor, I'm sorry. That'd be great. Khabib versus Conor. And then you have October 13th, you have Fedor versus Chael, which is a fantastic fight. Probably the biggest fight in Bellator history. And then you got Liddell versus Ortiz 3 in November. UFC MSG November 3rd. We'll be right back.